one of our haters who are out there watching.
I want to warn people about hypnoporn.
We need to stay meta.
Stop that.
Need new tires? Like, what?
If Jim would shut up for a second.
Oh, high fidelity.
Okay, don't tell me to shut up.
I'm not whining.
I eat doggies. I eat doggies. Feels like a party.
Stop that.
It's a war. They have made it so that I cannot be celebrating July 4th.
I don't care. I'm gonna lie. I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. How do I think? That's what I think. I don't.
We're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to be aggressive.
I'm an alpha guy.
I'll flip a table every time you aren't getting by.
Let's go. Just push.
It's all psychological warfare.
I'm not part of QAnon.
We know what they are doing.
For Trump.
If shit goes wrong, like, I will literally have to leave the country.
Stop that. I'll land my initial plane.
Okay, high five. This isn't the hi-fi show.
Good night. Nighty-night.
This is 6 Degrees of Stew. You don't need to stay meta, but I'm glad you're here. The Fraser Investigation. October 31st, 1978. The House Investigations Subcommittee on Korean-American Relations. Church critics contend that a working arrangement was developed in the 1960s between the South Korea government of the late President Park Chung-hee and Moon for the purpose of influencing United States foreign policy toward Korea. This close linkage was revealed in November 1978 by the United States House Subcommittee on International Organizations, headed by former Representative Donald Fraser of Minnesota. The report called for a federal interagency task force to investigate the apparent illegal activities of the Unification Church and its many related operations. The Fraser Subcommittee cited violations of the United States tax, immigration, banking, currency, and foreign registration laws by the Unification Church. The report was 447 pages long, and it charged that the Moon Organization promoted the interests of the Republic of Korea government, attempted to obtain permissions of an American corporation to export M16 rifles manufactured in Korea. The Unification Church, essentially one international organization, attempts to achieve goals outlined by Sun Moon, who has substantial control over the economic, political, and spiritual activities. Among these goals is the establishment of a worldwide government in which the separation of church and state would be abolished and which would be governed by Moon and his followers. The Fraser Report listed many other Unification Church's political activities, undertaken to the benefit of the Republic of Korea, to create political influence for itself, the Republic of Korea government, related to the organization's overall goals of gaining temporal power. 3 months after the report was issued, the Unification Church issued a 221-page denial of the charges. Moon's speeches to his followers clearly revealed his quest for political power and the ways he would use such power. In a speech in 1974, Moon said, quote, "Someday in the near future, when I walk into the congressman or the senator's office without notice or appointment, the aides will jump out of their seats and go to the senator or congressman, saying that he must see Reverend Moon. The time will come without my seeking it, that my words will almost serve as law. If I ask a certain thing, it will be done. If I don't want something, it will not be done. If I recommend a certain ambassador for a certain country and then visit that country, he will greet me with the red carpet treatment." Moon told his followers, quote, "If and when we have a nation of our own restored to God's side, how fast will our mission be realized? By that time, we can stir up the whole world. I am a thinker. I am your brain." Speaking of himself in the third person, Moon has declared that, quote, "If he finds it impossible to do his work in America, he will go to Germany. Germans are trained in totalism, so it will be easier to work on his mission there." The Fraser Committee's recommendations of further investigation of illegalities was dropped when Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980. Moon, of course, prospered under Reaganism. At that time, he was backed by two Japanese tycoons that the U.S. occupation had formerly imprisoned as war criminals. One was Yoshio Kodama, a Yakuza Japanese gangster boss and an organizer of fascist secret societies. Kodama made millions looting Manchuria in the war and died in 1984 while awaiting trial in the Japanese Lockheed bribery scandal. The other was Riichiro Sasakawa, who also made millions in the war and died in 1995. In the 1970s, when he controlled the $14 billion Japanese motorboat racing business, Sasakawa described himself as the world's richest fascist. The rest of this segment is going to deal with controversies and issues within the Moon organization and family issues and things of that nature. We're going to first talk about Moon's hidden child, Sam Park. To hide the boy's identity from his followers, Moon instructed his right-hand man, who was also the founding president and publisher of the Washington Times, to raise the child. Moon's illegitimate son was Sam Park, as I mentioned, and the mother was Annie Choi. Choi became a member of Moon's church along with her mother and sister in the early 1950s. At that time, the family lived in the southern Korean city of Busan. Moon had fled there after escaping a communist labor camp in North Korea, where he was imprisoned, reportedly on bigamy charges. Initially, he had only a few dozen followers who met in a two-room house on the outskirts of town who were expected to sacrifice everything for the church. For young female members, this included their virginity, and we've talked about this with the 6 Marys, but some of this will be repeat information. It's nice as a refresher as we move along, because the Moon organization and the Unification Church has such a rich history. Choi said the initiation rites for early female disciples involved having sex with Moon 3 times. She also alleges that Moon kept a stable of half a dozen concubines, known as the 6 Marys, and inducted her into the group when she was 17. She adds he would assemble them all in a circle and take turns mounting them. Choi's account is consistent with those of early followers, who claim that Moon's church began as an erotic cult, with Moon purifying female followers through sexual rites. Moon persuaded her mother that their family played a special role in God's plan. Just like Jacob, who married 2 women and had children by them and their handmaids, Moon would marry both of her daughters, and they would give birth to the world's first sin-free children. Choi's mother was so devoted to this vision that in 1954, she sold one of the family's homes and gave the proceeds to Moon. Soon thereafter, he opened a church in Seoul, and the movement began to flourish. By 1959, more than 30 churches had sprung up around Korea, and Moon's teaching started to spread to other countries. That year, Moon's marriage plans hit a snag when Choi's older sister abandoned the church and broke off the engagement. Rather than marry Choi, in late 1959, Moon began casting about for another bride. He settled on his cook's daughter, the 17-year-old named Hak Jan Han, who would go on to become the true mother. After their wedding in 1960, Moon, whose church was rapidly expanding in the United States, began teaching that marriage was the key to salvation. He and his new wife would create the prototype of the perfect family and give birth to sin-free children. Followers could join his sinless family by keeping themselves chaste until Moon married them off in one of his famous mass wedding ceremonies, and then build strong, faithful families of their own. Choi says she kept having sex with him regularly until 1964, when she moved to the United States to attend Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Prior to her departure, Choi claims she and Moon were married in a secret ceremony at his church. The following year, Moon made his first trip to the United States and stayed for several months with his deputy, Bo Hai Pak, near the nation's capital. During that trip, he spent a good deal of time with Choi. Before long, Choi was carrying Moon's child. Choi says Moon instructed her to hide her pregnancy and give the child to the Pak family to raise. Quote, deliver the message to Bo Hai Pak and his wife to use Kyoung, and that was the name that she was to give to her son with Moon. The Paks, who already had 5 children, pretended they were expecting another. Mrs. Pak stuffed her midsection with expanding mounds of cloth diapers to mimic pregnancy. When Choi went into labor, Pak drove her to a Washington, D.C. hospital and passed her off as his wife. The Paks were even listed as the child's parents on his birth certificate. Quote, I asked myself, what am I doing, she recalls, but then I reminded myself I was born for this mission. My personal dreams are no big deal. While he regularly visited the Pak home, especially after moving to the United States in 1971, he avoided conversing with the boy. Quote, he never asked me anything. How old are you? How's school going? Park recalls. Quote, it was as if he was making a point of not showing an interest in me. When Park was about 13, Choi finally told him who his parents were. Quote, when she said it, it made so much sense, Park recalls. Quote, of course, she's my mother. How could I not have seen it before? Park continued living with the Pak family. Gradually, Moon's 13 other children began to figure out that he was their half-brother. Not all of them took it well. Park says the eldest of the Moon's sons, Steve, once pointed a gun at him and threatened to rape and kill his mother. Moon's second oldest son, Heung Jin, who was about Park's age, embraced him as family. During his high school years, Park regularly visited Heung Jin at the Moon's estate in New York's Hudson Valley, where the pair spent their days hiking and talking about girls, a forbidden subject. Park, who longed for acceptance by the Moon family, recalls this as the happiest period of his youth. Shortly before Heung Jin's death, Park had moved in with his mother. Most of the Moon followers still believed that Park was Pak's son. To avoid raising questions, Park and Choi kept largely to themselves. Quote, I let very few people close to me. There were ramifications for a lot of people if I didn't maintain that identity. It shaped how I related to others, in that I became guarded and private. Initially, Bohai Park continued playing the father role. He bought Sam a car and paid for much of his tuition at George Washington University. Park, meanwhile, clung to the hopes that Moon would one day acknowledge his existence. Quote, I remember Sam saying, I just want him to recognize me publicly as his son once before he dies, recalls one member of the Pak family, who confirmed many details of Park's account.
I am the secret son, or love child, as depicted in a recent article of Reverend Sung Myung Moon, a billionaire founder of Unification Church and proclaimed the Messiah of all mankind. My mother, Soon W. Choi, was a scion of the powerful and billionaire Che family. They were the former owners of Korea Life Insurance, the second largest life insurance company in Korea, known for its iconic 63-story gold headquarters in Seoul, still the largest gold-cladded structure in the world. I was born into a world of great wealth, fanaticism, and hypocrisy. My life reads like a Korean soap opera, filled with money, sex, power, and intrigue. I witnessed firsthand how power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I've seen how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, all by one warped by a fanatical sense of righteousness, where the ends always justify the means. And lastly, I understand
Don't worry.
having a moment, guys. It's a moment.
It's okay.
I understand the psychology of rejection and secrecy. The circumstances surrounding my birth condemned me for a large majority of my life to a life lived in the shadows. Okay, I hold a BA in history with a minor interest in philosophy and psychology from George Washington University. And I completed my MBA coursework in finance from the same university. For the past decade, I've been involved in litigation in one form or another originating from a 1999 confidential agreement with my father and the Unification Church of India. My mother, I was once conditioned to believe that my father, Reverend Heung Jin Moon, was a Messiah of all mankind. But unlike my mother, who was brought into the Unification Church by her mother, my grandmother, I was born into it. I did not undergo a quote conversion experience, nor did I have to renounce my family members or give up a former way of life. The church was my way of life, but I sensed that there was something different about me. That difference revealed itself when I discovered at the age of around 12, late 12, early 13s, that my biological parents were in fact Reverend Heung Jin Moon and Soon W. Choi. The people who I thought were my parents and siblings, Lo Hee Pak and his wife Ki Suk Yoon, and their children were ordered by Reverend Moon to raise me from birth and keep the identity of my real parents a secret. But again, my father said to my mother that after he basically raped her, that he had to have sexual relations with her to reverse what the archangel Lucifer did to the young Eve. Reverend Moon taught that the biblical Eve was seduced by the archangel Lucifer when she was 17 years old, which was the real reason for the fall of man as described in the Bible. That's how Moonists think about the fall of man. One cannot understand the context of our involvement with my father in the Unification Church without first becoming aware of the central role my mother's family, the Chev family, played from the inception of his nation's spiritual movement. For both Mooney and non-Mooney alike, the implications of this, quote, hidden history of the Chev family are compelling and significant. When my father first met my grandmother in 1953, he knew from her name that she was going to be a very important person to him. Her name was Duk Sam Lee, and literally that translates into attaining the three, which is quite an odd name, even by Korean standards. But to any Mooney, her name was significant because it represents the central mandate of the divine principle, the unification belief system, which was the three blessings depicted in Genesis 1:23, which is to be fruitful, to multiply, and to have dominion over creation. Owing to the Chev family affluence, my grandmother was the primary financial backer of the nascent Unification Church movement, donating several $1 million throughout the 50s and 60s. In fact, there probably wasn't a soul who wasn't helped by my grandmother in the early church days, which is the reason why she's such a beloved figure within the Unification Church. Counting in today's dollars, $1 million from the mid-1950s would equate to approximately $8.5 million today. In addition to selling her $1 million mansion in the early 50s and donating the proceeds to the church, she continually donated significant amounts over the decades leading up to her passing in 1973. My grandfather, Song Mo Che, was a substantial businessman in his era. He was a self-made millionaire by 26, back when $1 million was really something. And despite making and losing a fortune 3 times, by the early 1950s, when my grandmother joined the Unification Church, he had firmly laid the foundation for the Shindola group, which was the Chev family-owned conglomerate. And he laid that foundation for it to grow into the multi-billion-dollar enterprise it became. As my grandfather's business expanded, his influence reached into the borders of power in Seoul, Korea. On many occasions, he was sent at the personal request of the president, at that time, Park Chung-hee, to lead trade negotiations with the U.S. and Washington. And during the Park Chung-hee years, he had a direct phone line to the Blue House, the hotline, as they called it. And he was head of the organization akin to the Council of Economic Advisors in the U.S. And he would closely advise the president on economic policy. My grandfather built an elite business group and became the second richest man in Korea, as judged by tax payments, behind Byung-Chul Lee, the founder of the Samsung Group, who was a close personal friend of his. It's kind of ironic that when they, the wealthiest men in Korea, met for lunch, they would mostly end up talking about their family and kids and not business. In some ways, this epitomized the type of man my grandfather was. Despite all his success and power, what really mattered to him the most was the well-being of his children and employees. At heart, he was a humble and noble man and was considered to be the most ethical businessman of his generation. And that is a fact my mother and I are most proud of.
Especially being Korean.
Especially being Korean, corruption was basically still is today. Given the family standing, it's easy to see why my father was transfixed on gaining the support of the Ches. With my grandfather's support, the corridors of power and finance would have been wide open to his nascent movement. There's no telling how he might have, or how high he might have risen with the right backing. For my father, the Ches were the jewel in the crown for the fulfillment of his messianic vision. To non-Moonies, the following is nonsensical, so again, indulge me and bear with me. But my father told my mother repeatedly that God was trying to, quote, consummate all of human history through the Che family. He believed that my grandfather stood in the historical archangel position. My two uncles, my mother's younger brothers, stood in the historical Cain and Abel position. And my mother and her oldest sister, who both joined the church soon after my grandmother joined in 1953, they stood in the historical Leah and Rachel position. My father believed he had to model the life of the biblical Jacob by marrying two blood sisters and have 12 sons with the sisters and their handmaidens. Like Jacob, my father planned to first marry the oldest sister, my aunt, in 1960, and then 7 years later divorce her and then marry the younger, more favored sister, who was my mother. In the years leading up to 1960, most everyone in the church knew about my father's marital plans to marry both my aunt and my mother, and acknowledged my mother as the future, quote, true mother of the Unification Church. According to my father, if he was going to get his mission right, he needed to get these crucial relationships within the Che family right by modeling what the biblical Jacob did. Unfortunately, due to my father's overactive libido, which resulted in several unintended pregnancies with other women, my aunt's faith in my father eroded and culminated in her leaving the Unification Church soon after her official engagement to him in the late 1959. All this is stuff hardly anyone knows. So this is like the hidden history, what they, for good reason, have tried to keep quiet. It contradicts what they've been teaching the people from 1960. So after my aunt broke off their engagement, my father went into a tailspin. A relationship they had cultivated over 7 years, which was central to his mission, simply evaporated. Rather than acknowledging his own responsibility, he blamed my aunt and the Ches for failing him, which is the typical Reverend Moon modus operandi of passing the buck and blaming everyone else except himself. However, he had a dilemma. He had to keep to the, quote, heavenly schedule and be married in the spring of 1960 when he was 40 years old. Moonies believed that the number 40 holds significant cosmic importance, so he needed to quickly find a bride in a short period of time, about 4 months. Talk about a rebound situation. That's basically what happened when he chose Hak Jahan, the Mrs. Moon, to be his wife. Since he felt rejected by the Ches due to what he believed was my aunt's betrayal, which he took as a personal affront to his authority and wishes, he ended up choosing Hak Jahan, the current Mrs. Moon. The only criterion he gave to finding his new bride was that she be a nobody and a girl where parental approval was unnecessary. As a teenager, Hak Jahan was smart, hardworking, and pretty. But unfortunately for her, she had a mother who was both ignorant and unkind. In many ways, Hak Jahan was a victim of circumstance, since she was the illegitimate product of an affair between her single mother and a married man with whom she attended the same-sex cult prior to her joining the Unification Church, and where her mother ended up working in the kitchen as a maid. Since Hak Ja Han's biological father didn't claim her as his daughter, parental approval was never an issue. Fast forward to 1964, and things are not going well for my father and his grandiose plans for world domination. 4 years after the Holy Wedding in 1960, the Messiah, my father, and his perfect bride, Hak Ja Han, occurred, and the world barely took notice. One has to understand the general belief of the membership in 1960 in the Unification Church. Moonies at that time, they actually believed and thought that once my father was married to Hak Ja Han, that the heavens would open up and the world would miraculously bow down and recognize him as Messiah and his wife as the true mother of all mankind, which is actually symptomatic of magical thinking that tends to go on in cults. The reality, however, was a major letdown. Their eldest child, Yejin, who was initially proclaimed to be a heavenly prince, ended up being a girl. Heejin, the third child, died soon after her birth. And the membership growth was stagnant, and the church still struggled financially. This was in stark contrast to my grandfather, whose wealth and influence continued to expand and prosper during that period. My father concluded he had made a mistake by marrying Hak Ja Han, and he needed to course correct and go back to the original plan with the Chens, or what he called or termed the Chen family provenance. My mother's decision to go to the U.S. in the spring of 1964 to pursue her graduate studies at Georgetown University prompted my father to act on his plan. Essentially, my mother wanted to get away from my father in Seoul, Korea, and give Mrs. Moon some breathing room. Understand that ever since Hak Ja Han married my father in 1960, Hak Ja Han and her mother were very uncomfortable because everyone in the church knew that Hak Ja Han was occupying a position never intended for her. This is the reason why Hak Ja Han's mother encouraged her to have as many sons as possible with my father, because she knew that with each additional son, her daughter's control of fear that if she left for America, he might lose her, and with that, the potential access to the Chen family wealth. Also, losing my mother would present him with an existential crisis, since the only thing protecting him and the church from my grandfather's retribution was my mother's loyalty and devotion to him in the church. And most importantly, by marrying my mother and conceiving children through her, he would be successful in modeling Jacob's life, or Jacob's course as the movies call it. And that was probably the most important mandate for him according to the divine principle. It's morphed since then. The divine principle today is quite different from what it was in the earlier days. They had to kind of adjust it and tweak it to kind of fit the facts that happened after he married the current Mrs. Moon. On the heels of my mother's arrival to the U.S., my father soon followed her to the U.S. My mother came in 1964, my father came in 1965, soon after. And he basically, quote, he said he was risking everything to make me. His sole purpose was to come and impregnate my mother, because he didn't want to lose her. It was only after he got confirmation of her pregnancy that he left her side. He stayed for about 3 months in 1965. I was born the following year in 1966, and the rest, as they say, is history. The truth of the matter was, by the time I was born, Mrs. Moon told my grandmother that she was prepared to step aside and vacate her position as his wife and true mother in favor of my mother, since my father made his intentions very clear that he was going back to the Chen family province because he made me. And yet it was my mother's compassion that prevented him from following through with his plan to remove Hak Ja Han and assume and allow my mother to assume her rightful position as the true mother of UC Parlance My mother wanted to believe in Hak Ja Han's potential, and as a woman, she didn't have the heart to displace Hak Ja Han and her 4 young children. And the reason is because she had to give me up after I was born. So she understood that. In hindsight, my mother knew that what she knows, that if she knew then what she knows now, she would have taken a harder approach. After I was born, my father wanted to have more children with my mother, but she refused because she couldn't bear the heartbreak of having additional children taken from her and raised by another family in order to keep things a secret from my grandfather. What I've just explained is part of the real history of the Unification Church. My mother, she endured, sexual exploitation from my father at the age of 17. She was arrested and interrogated by authorities because of the same my father. She forsake the $1 billion inheritance in support of the same man, my father. She conceived a son in secret and then was forced to give him away for the sake of this same man, my father. I, for my part, have for many years sought recognition from a man who I now realize was not emotionally available due to his narcissism. Having a son of my own, I can now recognize how tragic my father's life choices have been, as I could never conceive of abandoning my son. Let alone living a life without him. My father is truly a sad and tragic figure. The bottom line with him is this. One cannot claim to be the Messiah or true father of all mankind and not be a father to his own son. It's really the ultimate hypocrisy. Right. My grandmother and my mother did not sign on for what the Unification Church moved. They did not sign on for the cult of personality or the spiritual and financial enslavement of its members, many of whom, especially in Japan, were made destitute. And they didn't sign on for the creation of a Korean-centric ruling elite who have been forced and maintained the sycophantic cocoon the Moons live in. If the UC ever hopes to become a viable and legitimate organization, it needs to get back to the unification part of its namesake. There's no reason other than greed and corruption why the Moon family should hoard billions in offshore accounts, while the vast majority of its membership is still without. As the saying goes, charity begins at home, and it's time for the Unification Church movement to live up to its founding mandate of creating a one-world family and not merely giving themselves to it. Our hope for coming forward today is really to inspire others to have the courage to take back their power and stop participating in the lie that unfortunately became the Unification Church movement. Thank you very much for indulging me for your patience.
And that's the story of Moon's secret son, and Moon never acknowledging him, even publicly, before he died. He was raised lovingly and always had his mom in his life, even if he didn't know it, until she told him when he was 13. In 1981, Moon was taken back when the High Court in England ordered the church to pay the cost of £750,000 after it lost a libel action against the Daily Mail. The Unification Church and Moon lost that case. In 1982, Moon was sentenced to 18 months in prison on tax evasion charges. The church launched a $30 million campaign to overturn his conviction, with Heung Jin as its public face. That's his daughter, that also ran the church for a while. According to the Washington Post, in July of 1984, thousands of evangelical pastors were invited on an all-expense-paid trip to Washington, D.C. Although billed as a pageant for religious freedom, The event quickly devolved into a pro-Moon rally, with hundreds of devotees waving placards that read, "Reverend Moon Innocent, Victim of Bigotry." The emotional crescendo was a speech by Heung Jin, who wept as she recalled the tears and sweat her father had shed for America. Alongside Moon when he was sentenced was also his top aide, Takaro Kamiyami, and he was sentenced to 6 months in prison and fined $5,000 on several counts of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and perjury. They both appealed and lost those appeals, and Professor Laurence H. Tribe, which many of you might be familiar with, very popular on Twitter, constitutional law professor, he handled their appeals. He said he didn't know whether there would be an appeal to the United States Supreme Court in an article that I read. Professor Tribe argued successfully that deporting father would deprive him of contact with his 6 American-born children, who ranged in age from 2 months to 10 years. Judge Gatto agreed that deportation would be an excessive penalty, though he acknowledged that the public animosity towards Reverend Moon made this a difficult decision, one that is bound to be unpopular with a lot of people. Moon was allowed to remain at home pending the outcome of. So he did not get deported, but the other appeal was denied. The campaign, which cast Moon as an innocent man who had been prosecuted for his unconventional faith, struck a nerve. A motley coalition, including the American Civil Liberties Union, then Senate Judiciary Chairman Orrin Hatch, and religious conservative leaders such as Jerry Falwell and Tim LaHaye, eventually rallied behind him. This helped transform Moon from a pariah to a martyr. By the summer of 1985, when Moon was released from prison, the Reagan Revolution was in full swing, and Moon was perfectly positioned to benefit. The Washington Times, which he had launched 3 years earlier, had become a must-read among conservatives. Reagan himself read it every morning. Moon also won points with the New Right by wading into anti-communist proxy wars in Latin America. In 1985, after Congress cut off aid to the Contras, the Washington Times Foundation launched a pro-Contra slush fund. According to Bad Moon Rising, an investigative history by John Gorenfeld, a Moon front group called Confederation of the Association for the Unification of Societies of the Americas also distributed money and supplies to the Contra rebels. In another case, Moon's organization reportedly helped finance a coup, orchestrated by right-wing paramilitaries, cocaine cartels, and fugitive Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie that toppled Bolivia's democratically elected government. Bohai Pac later visited the mountainous Bolivian city, La Paz, and declared, quote, "I have erected a throne for Father Moon in the world's highest city." Interesting enough, too, I forgot to mention, after Moon was released from prison, both Jerry Falwell and Joseph Lowry of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference called on President Reagan to grant Moon a full pardon. 2,000 clergymen, including Falwell, Lowry, and other well-known religious leaders, held a God and Freedom banquet in his honor in Washington, D.C. So he had gained a lot of legitimacy. Okay, going down a wild road here. Everybody buckle up. Get ready for this. In 1987, Moon introduces the Black Heung Jin, and this would be Moon's dead son, who is up in heaven. He has somebody married to him down on earth. They have a child that's really not their child. Somebody just gave them their child. So now somebody is coming and saying, "I'm your son. His spirit is in my body." And this is the story of that. In 1987, Reverend Chung Hwan Kwok went to investigate reports that Heung Jin had taken over the body of a Zimbabwean man and was speaking through him. The Reverend Kwok returned to the East Garden professing certainty that the possession was real. The Zimbabwean was older than Heung Jin, so he could not be the reincarnated son of Moon. In addition, the Unification Church rejects the theory of reincarnation, Instead, the African presented himself to the Reverend Kwok as the physical embodiment of Heung Jin's spirit. The Reverend Kwok had asked him what it was like to enter the spirit world. The Black Heung Jin said that upon entering the kingdom of heaven, he immediately became all-knowing. The true family need not study on earth because they were already perfected. Knowledge would be theirs when they entered the spirit world. The Reverend Moon was thrilled with the news from Africa. The Unification Church had been concentrating its recruitment efforts in Latin America and Africa. Clearly, a Black Heung Jin could not hurt the cause. Without ever meeting the man who claimed to be possessed by the spirit of his dead child, Sun Moon authorized the Black Heung Jin to travel the world preaching and hearing confessions of Unification Church members who had gone astray. Confessions soon became central to the Black Heung Jin's mission. He went to Europe, to Korea, to Japan, everywhere administering beatings to those who had violated church teachings by using alcohol and drugs or engaging in premarital or extramarital sex. The Black Heung Jin spent a year on the road, dispensing physical punishment as penitence for those who had wished to repent, before Sun Moon summoned him to the East Garden. He was a thin black man of average height who spoke English, who seemed intent on charming the True family. He met the True children, and they kept asking him questions about his childhood, but he could not answer any of them. He did not remember anything about his life on earth, he told everyone. The Black Heung Jin's convenient memory lapse was interpreted as signs of him having left earthly concepts behind when he entered the kingdom of heaven. The Reverend Moon was just using the Black Heung Jin for his own ends, just as he had used the American civil liberties community before him. Sun Moon seemed to take pleasure in the reports that filtered back to the East Garden of the beatings administered by the Black Heung Jin. He would laugh if somebody out of favor had been dealt an especially hard blow. No one outside the True family was immune from the beatings. Leaders around the world tried to use their influence to be exempted from his confessional. The Black Heung Jin was a passing phenomenon in the Unification Church. Soon the mistresses he acquired were so numerous and the beatings he administered so severe that members began to complain. Mrs. Moon's maid, a Korean who married an American church member, appeared one morning with a blackened eye and covered purple bruises. The Black Heung Jin had beaten her with a chair. He beat Bo Hai Pak, a man in his 60s, so badly that he was hospitalized for a week in Georgetown Hospital. He told doctors that he had fallen down a flight of stairs. He later needed surgery to repair a blood vessel in his head. Sun Moon knew when to cut his losses. Once it became clear that he had to dissociate himself from violence, he had to let loose on the membership. Sun Moon simply announced that Heung Jin's spirit had left the Zimbabwean's body and ascended into heaven. The Zimbabwean was not quite so ready to get off the gravy train. At his last sighting, he had established a breakaway cult in Africa with himself as the role of the Messiah. Did you know that an arm of the Unification Church rescued the University of Bridgeport from bankruptcy? This happened in 1992. More than $100 million was pumped into the school by the church-affiliated Professors World Peace Academy. They also opened New Eden Academy International, a Unification Church boarding school, on the university's campus. The school serves 44 children of Unification Church members. The university's president at that time, Richard Rubenstein, is a rabbi and former president of the Professors World Peace Academy, the church arm that bailed out the university in exchange for controlling interest in its board of trustees. In 1989, Moon's church established a committee to find an American college. Salonen, once president of the Unification Church of America, was part of the search. The University of Bridgeport was considered ideally situated between New York and Boston. The offer of a $50 million forgivable loan to solve the University of Bridgeport's money woes, though initially resisted, was finally accepted by a torn board of trustees. A 25-page agreement was signed on May 28, 1992. It spelled out how the loan would be paid out over several years and eventually forgiven. As a creditor, the PWPA was to be consulted in university budget preparation. It could name 60% of trustees and have veto power over a selection of president. The PWPA could not restrict academic freedom and was prohibited from distributing propaganda or wielding influence on campus, according to the document. An addendum attached to the agreement said that the PWPA's intentions were to create a world-class university system across the globe with the University of Bridgeport at its hub. The system would exchange students, professors, and knowledge on a regular basis. In 1998, the original loan was forgiven ahead of schedule. PWPA gifts to the University of Bridgeport eventually amounted to $113 million. Not counting funds towards a soccer stadium on campus, Salonen maintains the grand global vision of the PWPA had for the University of Bridgeport was always mischaracterized. Two schools sprang up around campus after members of the church settled in the city. One, the Bridgeport International Academy, which has a link on the Family Federation's national website, is a private non-sectarian boarding and day high school on Lafayette Street. The other is Bridgeport Hope School, an elementary school located next door. The PWPA, meanwhile, expended all of its resources on the University of Bridgeport. The group used to hold big worldwide academic conferences. There were events where academics, deans, and university heads could network. Quote, once we threw all of our weight into the university, the group could no longer hold large conferences that helped attract new members. PWPA's dwindling network also impacted its ability to supply its 60% of University of Bridgeport's trustees. Few, if any, members of the church remain as trustees, Anderson said. He described the PWPA, which was founded by the church, as, quote, legally alive, end quote. Nearly 3 decades and an estimated $113 million later, the deal is no more, as of 2019. The Professors World Peace Academy, a group founded by the controversial Sun Myung Moon and an organization known widely as the Unification Church, exists in name only. Still, its dissolution isn't a matter of winners or losers, said Neil Salonen, who facilitated the arrangement and helped rejuvenate the failing university as its president for nearly 2 decades. I don't think the PWPA thought of it in those terms, said Salonen, who was retired. They were willing to invest in something that would have been priceless if it succeeded. In terms of international education and laying the foundations for peace, it was money very well spent. The recent pronouncement that ties between the University of Bridgeport and the church have been severed was held by many on the outside, particularly alumni and others who felt scared or embarrassed by the association. The news left many staffers on campus nonplussed. Quote, this to me is all wonder under the bridge. This past year, said Tariq Saab, an executive vice president at the University of Bridgeport, who has been on campus for 24 years. Moon visited the campus on several occasions, a decade before he died in 2012. He became less active, Gordon Anderson, Secretary General of the Professors of World Peace Academy, said. The church itself never supported the university. Its members did. When? Directed by Moon. Major donations from church members to the university stopped around 2002, they say. Board of Trustees Chairman Robert Birchman said it was simply time this year to remove all references to the church and PWPA from trustee bylaws. On May 17th, the Board of Trustees voted unanimously to do so. It is also unclear how many members of the church, now called the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, remain in the area. Its Connecticut branch is now centered in Bridgeport. I don't need new tires, but stay tuned for the next episode.
If you're one of our haters who are out there watching,
I want to warn people about hypnoporn.
We need to stay meta.
Stop that.
Need new tires? Like, what?
if Jim would shut up for a second.
Oh, high fidelity.
Okay, don't tell me to shut up.
I'm not whining.
I eat doggies. I eat doggies. Feels like a party.
Stop that.
It's a war. They have made it so that I cannot be celebrating July 4th.
I don't care. I'm gonna lie. I'm not gonna pretend. I don't care. How do I think? That's what I think. I don't.
We're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to be strategic. We're going to have to be aggressive.
I'm an alpha guy.
I'll flip a table every time you aren't getting by.
Let's go. Just push.
It's all psychological warfare.
I'm not part of QAnon.
We know what they are doing.
For Trump.
If shit goes wrong, like, I will literally have to leave the country.
Stop that.
I'll land my initial plane.
Okay, high five. This isn't the hi-fi show.
Good night. Nighty night.